Yo guys, welcome back to a brand new video. So yesterday I made this video about George's response to Caitibugzz, and I guess sometime recently Caitibugzz came across this video and responded to that, and upon reading her response, I think it's making things a lot worse. And not in a way of her responding in of itself, but the way she begins to word things. Her arguments are very contradicting, and she makes this attempt to double down that George 100% is an assaulter. So I'll get right into it. Katie responded on Twitter and just labeled it, "For now, goodbye." She starts by saying, "For now, this is what I have to say. He admitted to touching me, that I was drunk, that I verbally didn't consent. In my mind, the conversation is over. He said silence does not equal consent, yet 1. Never got verbal confirmation from me, 2. Chose to move to a sexual act on the couch where everyone was hanging out without asking. I don't know how these two facts coexist. How can I consent when there was no question? How can I consent when I was drunk?" So for starters, she does this quite a bit throughout her entire response, is consistently pointing out the fact that she was drunk, but doesn't use that same argument for George at all. And the only time when she does point out the fact that George is drunk is in defense to her situation and demonizes the fact that he was intoxicated. She continues and says, "I prepared proof on the idea that he wouldn't admit to it, that he would deny touching me or ever being there, but he admitted it, that I was drunk and that he touched me in front of everyone, that I never said yes nor did he ask, and I am still asked for a response, proof, explanation. Frankly, I think it's fucking insane." This is what I mean by the wording is making things worse. You can say what you want about my opinions on this, but at this point I don't really care. The way she is wording things makes them sound so significantly worse. Like, the thing is, I read into this situation, I listened to George's response, I listened to Katie's first initial conversation about this on her stream, and the way she is wording this makes it sound like George is fucking Bill Cosby or something, and people are asking for proof because George showed receipts. He showed almost everything in his video, and the one thing that you thought he was gonna deny, he admitted to, because realistically, why would he feel like he did something horribly wrong? And for extra context, George and Katie were already cuddling on the couch. He already had his hand on her waist, and according to both of them, they were already doing this for a long time, and George slowly moved his hand up her shirt, and that's as far as things went. So when you hear the context of this, it makes it sound like George just put his hand in her pants, or just straight up started groping her. Dude, I'm sorry, but this is fucked up. The way this is worded is genuinely fucked up, especially because the context is not there. Anyway, she continues and says, "If you still need more after hearing him admit those two simple facts, then nothing I can say is going to change your mind," which I disagree because context is wildly important, but here it is anyways. Addressing the stream. As for the iMessages he showed outside of Insta DMs, all proof was him showing a group chat that he wasn't even in. Showing messages from my friends, which isn't me. The only message showing a response from me was when we asked about the drinking game we played. That was after we played it on the first night where nothing happened. I liked the game and wanted to play it with other friends at the convention, so I asked for the name. Don't know how it's relevant to anything. I feel like George made this one wildly clear, is that she'd mentioned that he was coercing her to drink when she was the one who was asking to play the game. She had played it the night before. She wanted to drink. She had said in her first video that people were pressuring her to drink because she was being handed alcohol, but she was there to drink in the first place as well. And Katie also explicitly states multiple times that she was drunk as a huge catalyst for her argument. So I could argue that it is incredibly relevant, especially because in Katie's first video on her stream talking about this, she words it in such a way that it makes it sound like they were coercing her and pressuring her to get drunk, and that's what George was trying to dispute here. I don't think Katie is stupid at all, and George made his point wildly clear, so I think it's kind of shitty that she's trying to just move all of that out of the way, especially since the idea of giving alcohol to someone who is not of drinking age is not only a massive criminal offense, but is also something that can be very predatory. Now, continuing, she says, "Why I went back. Because my friends want to, and I went with them everywhere that they went that trip. I would also like to clear up that this all happened when I went back. Nothing happened the first night, something I also did not admit at first because it's embarrassing and I thought irrelevant, but the second night, another reason I was willing to go back was I heard of a different creator who was in the room I wanted to meet, but when I found out that I had left an hour earlier, I was already in the Uber. I had forgotten this until looking back at text when I said this to a friend the day after." And she shows some messages and says, "But blank brought me and Ghosty back to Dream's room to see him. He said blank was there too with some other people, so I was excited because I was always wanting to get to know blank left right before we showed up. So it's just Dream and George, and then we show up anyway, and I'm like, fuck, okay, drinking games, etc. Ghosty leaves to throw up. Then it's 4 of us, and we were all drunk, and it was honestly really weird because I was drunk and too tired to comprehend what was happening, but we were up till 6:30 a.m. She continues and says they were all fine. Like I said in my stream, I did have my age in my bio like it is to this day. The messages were nothing insane, just banter. Like I said, I admitted to messaging him after I never hid the fact, I was still considering myself lucky for what happened to me, even if I was uncomfortable and didn't ask for it. I was hating myself around now, thinking I was ungrateful, but as you can see, nothing insane or proof-worthy being said, just banter. She again brings up this point about her bio having her age in it. I never check people's bios, and I don't see why that is like a staple for your age. Like, people are immediately supposed to be like, oh, maybe their age is in their bio. It's not really something that specific. And other than her mentioning that she brought up her age during that drinking game, this is really her main argument about her age being stated publicly, is that it was on her Instagram bio, which is not really a great defense as to saying, yes, people should absolutely check my bio for my age. That doesn't really make a lot of sense. And her whole point for bringing up her age is that the age gap in of itself was weird, which I'll get into that later because she does begin to talk about it. She goes on to say, again, I felt lucky to be talking to a verified account, someone famous, someone I'd followed and watched for a while. I was uncomfortable with what happened, but trying to swallow it and suck it up so I didn't have to acknowledge or accept it. Although our texting ended a month after, I can see why people find me at fault. But the thought process of someone who went through what I have is a very unique experience, which is why I understand why it seems stupid. Only so many people have been in it to understand. She goes on and said, again, like he said, at one point he asked for my snap, shows 2 messages of him asking for a snap, and says, but we did not Snapchat much at all because I don't use Snapchat. I haven't since around middle school. The most that happened were a few pictures of him with a quesadilla that he sent me, and then I resorted back to DMs, which didn't last long. The time we all stopped interacting was around Paris TwitchCon. I walked him out to the elevator. We left at the same time. My room was on the other side of the floor in the hotel. You had a hallway of rooms on one side, elevators connecting them, then the other hall. I was on the opposite side, therefore had to walk through the elevator room. I didn't walk him there. We both headed in that direction. I said, well, bye, and that's when he did the whole elevator is broken bit. Now this one does seem like different perspectives, but then again, they mentioned that they left at the same time. This is more of a he said, she said situation, and there's not really anything else to back this one up. The whole interaction seemed relatively innocent, and again, after this happened, the night went on, and neither of them talked to each other afterwards, at least in person. So I'm gonna just go with that this is a difference in perspective thing. The unmentioned friend. There was a man who was there that I left out. He wasn't there for long. He left early, which is why I didn't mention him. I didn't even know his name, but here is a message from this guy. I've never spoken with him. This is simply a message he sent to someone who was in the room that night too, and it is all he really adds to the situation. He left before saying anything really happened. And the message says, I'm currently watching George cuddle with Katie. The ages are even specified here. I find this a little bit weird. It feels like it's missing context as well. A mysterious stranger sends a message to another mysterious stranger, and then Katie gets her hands on it. It just feels very unspecific, but otherwise there's not really much else to say about that one. She continues and says, we cuddled. A lot of the touch was initiated by him, probably not realizing it. I mean, he was literally spooning me from my left as I faced Ghosty to my right. A lot of the cuddling he may have felt was personal, but was just me being drunk. Everyone on the couch was doing the same thing, all drunk close together. But I get it, I was drunk. I didn't think cuddling automatically meant it was to turn sexual. I didn't know it was an invitation. I wasn't gonna push him off in front of everyone. He took it a step further in front of everyone, all because he assumed things and assumed he had the right. As a shy person, I could not speak up in front of him and everyone else, let alone say yes. Even if you wanted to take a step forward sexually, why do it in the open? If you're cautious about consent, why not ask? That's usually the first step, and more important, why does everything have to get taken a step further? And may I reiterate that I was drunk. I'm gonna be wildly straightforward here. I think this statement in particular is so shitty. She states that he took things a step further because he assumed things and assumed he had the right. It makes it sound like George gave the impression that he was entitled to do what he did. You can argue that that's not what she's saying or implying here, but I think this whole statement is worded very carefully, especially because she doesn't mention how he touched her. Again, for clarification, he slowly moved his hand up her shirt. When she says things turn sexual and in front of everyone in all caps, it makes it sound like he did some crazy explicit shit, and I think that's really unfair as a way of wording this. So far, the only thing I agree with is in this entire statement is her asking, if you're cautious about consent, why not ask? She does reiterate this point, but this is, again, the only thing I agree with, and the only reason I agree with this is from a content creator perspective. I know my channel isn't huge or as crazy as big as George's, but I'm very well aware that there are people in my audience that most likely are not exactly over the age of 18, and I don't make kids content. I make videos where I say poopy shit fart butthole. I mark my videos as not for kids. I mean, currently I'm using gameplay of me cutting giant rat people in half, and even then I'm still aware that my demographic is not entirely composed of grown adults who can make their own decisions. Now, my point being is that George makes kids content. He's a Minecraft YouTuber. So again, from a content creator perspective, and again, like I said in my last video, all the shit that's happened before on YouTube of people not verifying ages and getting wildly fucked over by it, from that perspective, anyone that I interact with that has a conversation or interaction in of itself that turns more mature, I would like to verify age in that case, especially with someone that I don't know. And although the circumstances here are different, when it comes down to consent and age, which are two very correlating things, I feel like that's something important that you should really keep in mind, especially as someone who has an audience mostly composed of children. And realistically, I think George could have saved himself a load of trouble by asking just two simple questions. How old are you? Is this okay? And I'm not even saying that George is even remotely a bad person or had any malicious intent, but I think if he was realistically as cautious of this as he said he was, then those questions would have been one of the first things to ask. And again, to be specific, this is more over a content creator perspective. If I didn't really make content and I didn't have an audience, my opinion on this would honestly likely be a little bit less in the middle and more one-sided. And also towards the end, she has to reiterate that she was drunk, and to specify, again, she uses this argument that she could not consent, which is true. As someone who is drunk, you cannot consent, but the thing is, everybody was drunk. So was George. So the wording of this, again, feels very unfair. She could have moved. Yes, I got up and sat in the same spot, getting up to drink more, etc. Mentally, I believe in a room on a sofa with people on it, you just sit back where you were when you get up. Mentally, I was also drunk, and even if I were to move, that would be an obvious hit to his ego and him and everyone in the room. A bold move I didn't need to make. I could just deal with it till the night was over, and I didn't want someone I had watched for a while or with a large following to hate me for denying to even sit near him. I didn't want to embarrass him or myself. I know it's a dumb thought process, I acknowledge it. She goes on to say she stayed when her friends left. I didn't make the conscious decision to choose to stay. My friend left throwing up in her hand and I didn't know. She was so drunk she couldn't hold in her vomit and pass out in our bathroom. And the more the night went on, the drunker I was. Like I said before, I put up with it in the moment because I thought it was a price I had to pay for being around such big creators. She doesn't really specifically mention that her best friend left. Even Dream backed up George saying this, that when her best friend left, she told her goodbye and went back to the couch. So I'm not entirely sure who she's talking about here. But given the title of the caption, I'm going to assume that it's her best friend. So again, this statement feels like missing context. Something about this does not really feel right. Those last 3 points, may I remind you, are not an invitation to be sexual or that I wanted it, and if he thought I did, he could have asked. Well, he assumed because your body language. We had just met. Why did he think he knew me so well that he could assume how I felt, assume he knew what my mannerisms meant? You don't know me. Apparently you didn't even know my age, but you knew what I wanted? No, he assumed it's what I wanted because why wouldn't I want that from someone like him? Okay, what the fuck? What is this wording? You can't tell me that this is not so carefully worded. I'm serious. Again, even this ending, it's making George sound like he gave the impression that he was entitled to do any of this. And again, I still stand by the fact that George should have asked those 2 specific questions, but even so, on both accounts, the both of them were cuddling on the couch for a good while. It's not something that like mutual platonic friends do. So again, in my opinion, the questions are important, but this is making his actions sound like they were meant to be malicious. And she continues and says, and remind me, since when was smiling an invitation? When was sitting next to someone an invitation? Since when was being drunk an invitation? This is so meticulously worded, and it's getting a little bit frustrating to read. I don't see why he would have ever gotten the impression that what he did was wrong because you two were cuddling on the couch, and then after your friend left, you went back to him. There's no reason for afterwards, especially, for him to think that he did something wrong. I think it's really obvious I'm defending George a lot more in this video than I did my last, and it's because of this response. This response is, I think it's not right. I think it's fucked up, and I think it's really carefully worded to make George seem like he did something that was so outstandingly and noticeably bad that he should have immediately realized that he was doing something horribly wrong, and that's not the case. Anyway, she goes on to say, any laughing I did with your hand on my clothes was out of nerves, because I didn't think cuddling would result to that, and my shock left me speechless, because I'd never been to a guy's hotel room, never done anything sexual, never experienced that cuddling meant what it did. I didn't know that this was normal or not. You touched me for the first time. I'm gonna get shit for this one, and I don't care, but you're an 18-year-old grown woman at the time. This comment that you never expected that cuddling meant what it did, I don't really understand this. Do you just cuddle with every person you meet? Cuddling isn't a platonic thing. It's something much more intimate. Like, to cuddle, you have to be very close to another person. You have to have your arms around them. So this response is starting to get really confusing. So we could give her the benefit of a doubt here and say that she's just a very naive naive adult woman who didn't realize that cuddling with someone that you had just met the day before wasn't on a higher level of intimacy. Do you realize how this sounds out loud? So again, to repeat myself, this wording sounds messed up. It sounds very construed. She goes on to say, "You're a fucking grown man who knows better. Why do I have to be strong or pull away or say stop? It's my fault because I was asking for it, hinting at it. I should have known, but never his for not being able to ask a simple question before doing it. At his age, silence can be consent. A head nod is silent confirmation. In order for confirmation to happen, it needs to follow a question that was never asked. And how is a drunk person supposed to consent? You think I was in the power to consent to a 26-year-old man to touch me because I laughed?" Again, I don't even have to say it. The wording is construed very fucked. Again, at the time, he had the idea that she was older than she was, and this makes it sound like the only reason he did what he did was because she laughed. But he was drunk too. Personally, when I'm drunk, I don't stick my hand under people's clothes on a couch in a room full of other people without asking. That's just me though. I find this argument like very contradicting. Respectfully, like, everyone who is drunk is completely incapable of making a sexual decision. Yes, I agree with that. With someone you don't know, that is completely true. But George was drunk and he was supposed to know exactly what he was doing apparently. And the thing is, I'm pretty sure he was, but even then, it was to a very controlled extent. And the wording of this, again, for the millionth fucking time, is widely construed. George put his hand under her shirt, and this makes it sound like he went straight to fucking finger blasting her in front of the entire crowd of people. I think Katie was really mindful of the way she worded this, and that's becoming more and more obvious. Now, the next point is everyone in the room could verify she was comfortable, and she shows texts from the day after. And I don't know who these are from. I'm gonna assume they're from her friends because she said that when she had left the room, her friends noticed that she was not in a good mood. And these messages don't even explicitly say, "Hey, I noticed that you were really uncomfortable, that you didn't look like you were in a good mood when this was happening." They were just mentioning that George was being touchy and that they were checking if she was alright with that. And I would assume this is just friends looking out for each other, which is respectable. But these messages were meant to contradict that people couldn't tell that she was uncomfortable, and they don't exactly do that. Now, she goes on to say, "After verifying I was 18 refers to a question I answered during a drinking game that I'll explain later. Of course, I played it down with my responses at the time. I was embarrassed. I wanted to seem cool because I had never been sexual with someone before. How was I supposed to know what it was supposed to feel like emotionally? I was nervous and uncomfortable because I didn't want it, or because I was inexperienced, or because I was drunk. I didn't understand what I felt, but I knew I felt off. And the friends in that room were some of the last people I came out about how it affected me, because I was embarrassed at my experience. Embarrassed at the fact that it was out in the open. Scared to react when it happened because with any reaction I showed had an audience, as he made his move in a room full of people. But let me remind you that their initial gut reaction by simply being in the same room and seeing the situation was them messaging me the next day worried, asking if I was okay before they had talked to me about how I felt. They felt gross." Now, I feel like this is mostly a friend thing. I feel like if I go out into a public space with a friend who's specifically a girl and she's cuddling with a guy that she recently just met and things go mildly farther, I'm gonna ask. Like, I'm gonna ask, "Hey, like, were you okay? Were you alright with that?" I feel like that's a normal thing to do as friends, and that's something that friends do in general. But she's using her friend's vigilance as proof that everyone else should have noticed. Now, continuing on, she brings up the wristband. "I would like to mention another girl I didn't mention because, like the other guys, she left really early into the night. I'm admitting I didn't mention her because she only tagged along one night and didn't do much. I also didn't know her too well. She was friends with Clay and the girl talking to him. I haven't messaged her since that night until today when she reached out. It is clear that she sent the message in the chat, obviously it being her hand, no room for confusion on it being in my hand, and once again, he was not even in the group chat to see it, only Clay. And even if he just assumed we were all 21 because one of us was, all these assumptions could have been cleared up pretty quick with a question." Which is true, but then she continues with, "The party we were at where the wristband talk initiated from was an 18+ party that you needed a band to enter. We had asked people around us for a wristband to enter the party, not a 21 wristband to drink. As you see in the pictures, a 21 wristband was given by staff after seeing ID and after entry. The wristbands we were asking around for and searching for was just entry to the party. Even if you thought I was asking around for a 21 wristband, that would only prove that I was underage. Again, neither guys were at the party. We didn't end up staying at that party because we couldn't get wristbands for everyone. Only a few of us got in. My one friend gave me theirs so I could walk in and see a creator party for the first time, but I left immediately after taking a video or two, knowing Ghosty and other friends were sitting outside unable to get in, with the wristbands cut off by staff as we left. I didn't even have a party wristband on any time I met with him after in the room, let alone a 21 age one. I beg you all to watch my vlog from VidCon documenting video of this party and the wristbands being cut off in the vlog. Now, given the fact that you were already in the party and that you went up there with them to drink, that is also another viable reason to assume that you were over the age of 21. But still, at the end of the day, I still think it would have been a better idea for George to ask because it would have saved him a lot of trouble. Now, she goes on, "For the next point, I thought she was 21. The girl who left early also sent me this message today. It's her conversation with Clay that night before she left the room, as she recalls it to a friend a few days later. I've typed a message on my phone and showed it to Clay being like, does George realize there's 8 years between him and Katie? And he looks at me at deadpan and is like, like, I don't see why it matters. I'm like, oh, okay. He was drunk, so I do not fault him for what he may have responded with, as maybe he wasn't thinking right. I like how this intoxication argument still doesn't apply to George. And she goes on and says, this is also her recalling, so it could be wrong or untruthful, but I don't believe that she has a reason to lie simply messaging a friend a few days later, especially when at the time of that text and up until I came public about it, she didn't even know anything happened that night she left before. This one is just hearsay, I guess, so there's not really much to say about that one. She continues and says, that night the game we were playing asked who was the last to lose their virginity. This is when I said me because I was 18 and still a virgin. This is also when Clay chimed in to argue for his best friend and say along the lines of, well, he lost his at 19, so you aren't that old yet, so technically he would still drink. And he drank. I assume this meant he was listening, but maybe he wasn't. I remember this question because of text I sent and because it's something I'll never forget. Yes, I know it's hard to remember a question like that thinking back now, but that night he couldn't have forgotten it that quick. Remembering back to my answer just an hour/minutes prior before making a move didn't seem impossible. With him saying I didn't remember what happened that night and nitpicking my story apart with his great drunk memory, I wonder how he can't remember the most important part of it all, aka me saying my age. Okay, so now George's memory and decision making are skewed because he was drunk, but she remembers this very vividly. I feel like the text there that she mentioned that she had sent that helped her remember would have been pretty important to add here, because her argument about intoxication, especially in the beginning, has completely flipped. I don't think he's dumb. I think even if he was talking to someone, especially in Insta DMs, he would check for an age or at least see a bio. Someone who was so concerned about consent wouldn't be so naive. Someone with such a big platform wouldn't risk it unless they knew they could pull the I didn't know card. Her friends influence her because they hate us. I wonder why. Their hatred grew because of what happened to me. These situations always end in victim blame. If I didn't do this, she shouldn't have worn that. She shouldn't have been drinking. She was asking for it. We are embedded into society to cover for assault. It's what we were built on. It's easy to say what I should have done looking from the outside, not being the one in the situation in the moment. It's also easier to think of how I could have gotten out of that situation now that I'm not in it, and now that I'm sober and can make clear choices. I want this situation to circle back to the original point, to make aware that the reality that many girls face in this community, that many people are forced into silence. It's not petty drama, but real life people that have been affected. I just don't want victims to feel that they have to prove themselves to people that to be believed, that they are only valid if they have proof. I believe you. My story was a bit different because it was on such a wide scale with a big audience. Yes, I know I do not owe it. Victims do not owe anything to anyone, but with my unique situation, I had to give proof nonetheless considering the circumstances. I'll accept it if people don't believe me. I said all there is. Then she starts talking about people making fake allegations and says how she despises them. I don't know what this was for, but I agree, I guess. She then says that this will be the only proof and just kind of goes on how she's trying to spread a message here and that there's a lot of people who've been through the same thing, and says she will be away for a week and she will stream a final statement. So once again, you can hear her voice and sincerity and probably my final statement on it all. And that's basically the end of her response. I'm gonna be super direct with this. I thought this response was honestly really awful. The way this is worded makes it sound like George was going after her maliciously, trying to get her drunk from the start and influencing her to do these things, and the only thing she really takes accountability for is saying her thought process for not leaving was a bit goofy because she wanted to meet another creator. Like, let's be real here, you're an 18-year-old woman, you know you're not of legal age to drink, yet you went up to somebody's apartment or a hotel room and willingly participated in a drinking game twice with people you have never met before in person. But then again, I feel like enough people aren't saying this part. I feel like her friends are also to blame. Her friends took her to that apartment. They knew there was going to be alcohol. They knew that she wasn't of age to drink alcohol. So I'm going to shorten this down. I think Katie's response was very meticulous. I think it was meant to paint this situation significantly worse than how it was. And I honestly believe that her friends are encouraging her to do that as well. That's all I got. Goodbye.